exception handling in your Java programming language, right? So this is a new topic. Okay, until now I am 100% sure that most of you, and whenever you are writing your program, even in your code singer, you might have got many exceptional error. Okay, like, so I'm 100% sure that all of you have got that error, that is your java.scanner something like, okay, no elements found error. I'm 100% sure that all of you have got that error, that is your no element found, that thing. So some of you might say that this is a compile time error. So remember, this is not a compile time error. This is your runtime error. So we are going to discuss about these such kind of runtime error, and generally we call these things as what we call it as our exceptions. So what are basically our exceptions? What is the difference between your exceptions and your errors? All these things we are going to cover in our today's lecture, right? So first of all, I will just give you an introduction about exception, what exceptions are, right? And then what are the different types of errors and all those things. Then after that, I will tell you about default exception handler. So in Java, because right now, if you will see over there, we are not writing any exceptional code, but still we are getting an error, we are getting exceptions. So how we are getting it? Using your default exception handler. So if our program is having Java is having default exception handler, so why we are reading this, why we are creating our own exception? So I will tell you about all those things, and we later on we will go for these your keywords. These keywords are again, these keywords are very important, okay, if you want to deal our exceptions. So in our today's lecture, we will start with our exceptions. So what is an exception? So if you will go through a dictionary meaning of your exception, so what is the meaning of exception? It means an abnormal condition. So it means everything is working fine. Somehow you got some sort of exception, right? You are working fine, some sort of exception you got. You are working on your laptop, everything is working fine. Then somehow something got happened, and your laptop is now it's not working. So you will say that I got some sort of exception over there. Okay, that is why now I won't be able to basically open my laptop or run my program on my laptop, whatever the case I have, right? So what do you mean by exception? So remember this definition: an unwanted, unexpected event that disturbs your normal flow of the program is called exception. Suppose you are working, see, like I can give you an example of your what whenever we are writing your program in Java, your what we call it as in your code singer. So whenever I am reading, so I'm just writing int a, okay, int a, int b, sc dot next int, sc, I'm not writing a scanner, sc is equals to new scanner, right? Sc next int. Here I am take how many inputs I am taking? I am taking 2 inputs. But in reality, what I am doing, I am passing 3 inputs, right? Then what will happen? In reality, your program is, if you are going to compile your program will work fine. Everything will work fine. But what is happening during runtime? Instead of 2, you are asking that, okay, I am passing 3 values. So in that scenario, what will happen? You will get an error. You will get an exception error. Okay, that no element found, something like that. So this is basically known as your what we call it as your exception. Means everything is fine. Okay, your program is correct. Everything is correct. But during runtime, what you have done, instead of 2, you are passing 3 values, and just because of this runtime thing, okay, runtime input values, you are getting an error, and we don't want this thing. So how we are going to handle these such kind of issues? So these such kind of issues we are going to basically learn, or we are going to cover in our this topic, that is our exception handling in Java. So till now, what you have you have an idea about what do you mean by exception. So exception means any abnormal condition. See, here the abnormal condition is that we require two input values, but we are getting how many? We are getting three input values. So this is what? This is an abnormal condition. So it might come in your program too. So how you are you handling these such kind of situation till now? No, you are not handling these such kind of situations. What if you have created some application and you might get these such kind of issues? So are you handling those issues? So till now I must say that, so let's assume you are not handling, then in that scenario you will get an error. So in order to sort out this issue, we are going to learn our this topic, that is our exception handling in Java. So let's go for one more definition, is that in Java, exception is an event. Okay, like you can call it event as our statement, an event that disrupt the normal flow of the program. So here our program is working fine according to us, but in one of the test case, what I have done, suppose I am having 5 test case, in 4 test cases I am just giving you only 2 values, but in the 5th test case I am giving you 3 values. So just because of this test case, my program will not execute successfully. So it will disrupts our normal flow of the program and we will get an error. So we don't want these such kind of things. So that is why these such kind of issues are known as what we call it as our exception. So basically remember that it is an object which is thrown at runtime. This is a very important term, okay? So our exception is nothing but it is also an object which is thrown at runtime. It will never thrown at our compile time. It will always thrown at our runtime. So if somebody is going to ask you exceptions, where when our exceptions occur, so you will always tell that exceptions always run during your or thrown during at your runtime, not at your compile time. Remember this point right now. So let's take few examples, and using these examples you will understand something. Now suppose you have created a program, and that particular program, suppose let's assume we have some program, okay, and your program is reading data from our Bennett University server, okay. So your program is working fine, all the students will able to fetch that particular file or whatever the data they want to fetch. Suddenly what happened after some time, in our Bennett University server, somehow some person deleted that particular file. Now our that particular program is performing a lot of operation, out of which one operation is reading that particular file. Then what will happen? Then we will get an error or your exception, that file not found exception. Why? Because see, your program is correct, your syntax is correct, the way you are reading your file, everything is correct. And during when you have executed and for like 20-30 students, it is working fine. But after some time, what happened, once you have deleted that particular file, then what will happen? You will get an error, or you what we call it as your exception, because now that particular file is not there. But have you handled that exception? No, we have not handled that exception. That is why what will happen, it will disrupt our normal flow of the program. Yes.
एक
Yes. Any question? If anyone is having any question, please let me know. So what will happen? It will read the data. So what will happen in that scenario? You will get file not found exception. So most of the time, I think if you are generally whenever you want to fetch some of the link, sometimes what you happen, you will find okay this PDF is available, okay, and you just directly click on that link, and sometimes you find out the error that file not found exception, okay. So how you are going to deal these such kind of exception? Because just because of this exception, now your program is not working properly. Because after that exception, okay, whatever the statements we have, we are not able to execute those statements. And that is the main problem with our exceptions. So that is the reason we have to find out those exceptions. What are the exceptions which we might get? So if we'll take about the one example, okay, real scenario example is that suppose your online class exception. So this is not a technical example, but using this example you will understand. So suppose right now you everything is working fine. So you have 4 lecture. So you have basically attended your first 3 lecture. Then in your 4th lecture, suppose your internet stop working. So what is this internet? So everything is working fine. You have your laptop, you have your notebook, you have everything what is required for your in order to attend that particular lecture. But suddenly during runtime, like during your 4th lecture, what will happen? Your internet stop working. And during this internet stop learning, what will happen? You will not be able to basically attend that particular lecture. And if you are not able to attend that particular lecture, then you will not get that particular concept. So basically, see, the things are basically related to each other. So just because of this exception, what will happen? You are not able to basically execute your normal flow of your schedule. Now you are not able to attend that particular your lecture number 4. So that is the problem with our exceptions. Okay. So if somebody is going to ask you, what do you mean by exception? So this is the definition that an unwanted and unexpected event that disturbs or disrupt the normal flow of the program is called as your exception. And remember, exception always thrown at runtime, not your compile time. Because compile time means you can check. For this example is that you will check, okay, everything is working fine, I can attend the lecture, I have already be a part of my lecture group, now everything is fine. But during runtime means during lecture time, your internet stop working. Okay, so just because of that, because you have followed all the things, and during compile time you can say that during earlier to that particular lecture you have seen like, okay, now everything is working fine, but during runtime you got something, you got some error, exception like that, so you won't be able to attend that particular class like that. So this is just a hypothetical scenario, okay, or you can call it a for with respect to your exception. Now, first of all, in order to start your exception so that you will not get confused with error, what I am going to do, I am going to tell you about the types of program errors. I hope that you already know about the errors like in your lectures as well as during labs also. What we generally focused upon, like there are 2 types of errors, like your runtime error as well as your compile time errors. So you already aware about these 2 types of errors, but still I just want to give you what these errors are. So the most common error which you generally got is what your syntax error. Suppose you are writing CLASS and C is in your uppercase, then what this your syntax is incorrect. So this is known as what we call it as your syntax error. Similarly, you got some sort of semantic errors due to improper use of program statement. So suppose you are using some improper program statements, right? It means that meaning is not at all correct over there. Then in that scenario, you got what kind of errors? Your semantic errors. And the third one is your logical errors. Error due to the fact that specification is not respected. Okay, so it means logically, suppose if this is your int a and you are holding what 1.0, so logically is it correct? No, it is not correct. You cannot hold the value of your double value in your integer value. So these are what our logical errors. Then if you focused upon the point of view that errors are detected, so generally you already know that from a programmer perspective, whenever we are executing our program, so we got two types of error. First one is your compile time errors. And remember, like your syntax error, majorly your syntax error and your static semantic errors. Static semantic errors like this, 1.0. Okay, so you know that static means we have already decided earlier during compile time the value we are assigning a is equals to 1.0. So these are known as what we call it as your compile time error. So generally in most of the scenario you have seen that you generally got what kind of error, your syntax error. But during runtime you got what your logical errors. Logical errors, we are going to discuss about all those things later on. So sometimes, so runtime's errors, in most of the scenario you will get what we call it as your exceptions. So whatever the errors you are getting during runtimes are that these are known as your either exception or error. Remember. So I will tell you what is the difference between runtime error and your exception. Okay, because you will get exception only during your runtime. Okay, so don't get confused at what is the difference between error and exception. We are going to discuss about what is the difference between error and your exception. So let's take one example. What is the purpose of exception handling? Right now, so you till now you have an idea about what is an exception. Exception is something which is basically disturbing our normal flow of the program. Earlier our program is working fine, but just because of one case, okay, just because of one exception, now our program is not working properly. So that is known as our exception. So now what we are going to do if we are getting an exception? Okay, is there any solution? So yes, we have a solution, and that solution is known as your exception handling. So let's take one more example, is that suppose we have a server, and using this server, suppose this server can accommodate only your 10 requests. Okay, suppose it can accommodate only your 10 requests, and suppose your first 10 requests, what they got SQL exception. Okay, so they got SQL exception. So these are the steps which we need to follow. Okay, whenever we are basically executing, or whenever we are performing what, whenever we want to access our data. So first of all we have to open our this establish a connection, then we have to read the data. Okay, then after reading a data we got an exception in our request one, and just because of this exception we are not able to close our connection, because once we got this exception in this line, then automatically it will terminate our program. Okay, then suppose let's assume in this scenario what will happen, we were not able to close our your connection. Suppose for the all our 10 requests we got this your SQL exception. Suppose one more request came, okay, and that is our request number 10. And now this request is having no exception. Let's assume, okay, this request is having no exception, but still we are not able to execute our request number 11. Why? Because our server is not free, because our server can accommodate only 10 requests, and we are and it is holding all these 10 requests. So how we are able to accommodate our request number 11? So this is the problem which we might get in the case of your exception. Okay, now the question is, because of the exception we should not block or miss something, and we want that, okay, we don't want to block this our request number 11. So how can I solve this kind of issue? How can we solve these such kind of issues? So in order to solve these such kind of issue, we have a solution that is known as your exception handling. So for our hypothetical example, if you are writing your code on CodeSinger, suddenly your power cut, and then you already know that it may lead to loss of data. Okay, then what is the solution? Have a power backup. So this have a power backup is what? This is how we basically we are handling this our exception of power cut. Got the point? So if we have a power cut, so how we are handling this issue? We are now we are basically using our power backup. So this is the reason, that is the main reason why we required exception handling, so that if runtime we will get some sort of, you can call it as some sort of exception, so we it will not disrupt our or disturb our normal flow of the program. Got the point? So using some examples, more example, you will understand exactly the meaning of exception and your exception handling. So let's go through, first of all, we will go through the your theoretical definition of exceptional handling in Java. So till now we know the meaning of exception. We know the examples, few examples, that how we are getting an exception, and exception we always get during our runtime. And we know that we want to handle this exception, so that is why we required exception handling in Java. So what do you mean by exception handling in Java? Let's go for it. So the exception handling in Java is one of the powerful mechanism to handle the runtime errors. See, this runtime errors, so that the normal flow of the application can be maintained. So like in our previous example, this is just an hypothetical example. Now using this thing, what you are doing? You because you are not able, you might lose your data, but you don't want to lose your data. So in order to handle this your power cut exception, because this power cut can occur during runtime. Okay, runtime means when you are writing your code on your code zinger. So what you do, in order to handle this exception, you can have a power backup. Similarly, here also what you do, you use this exception handling, so that it will help us in that the normal flow of the application can be maintained, and it will not disturb our program. Okay. So exception handling does not mean repairing an exception. Remember, you are not solving that issue. Basically, you are handling that issue. Okay. So here for this issue, actually in this issue, you are not handling this power cut. You are not going to the electricity department and you are not solving that particular issue of light. Okay, I will sort out the problem from which transformer I am getting this power cut issue. No, you are not solving this issue. You are not able to do that, but still what you are doing, you are using a power backup. So this is just how you are basically handling that exception. You are not repairing this exception, right? So this is very important. So here we have to provide. So here we are not basically performing the repairing, but what we are performing, we are performing an alternative way to continue. So here our alternative way is what? Our power backup. So if we have, go for power backup. So this is what an alternative way to continue the rest of the program normally is the concept of your exception handling. Remember this point. So we are performing an alternative way to continue our rest of the program normally. So suppose for our first program, our programming requirement is to read data from remote file locating at your Bennett University. And suppose at runtime, if Bennett University file is not available, if we want that our program should not terminated abnormally, then we have to provide some local file to continue rest of the program normally. This way of defining alternative is nothing but exception handling. So here we are not providing the Bennett University file. Okay, here we are not providing that particular remote file, but what we are doing, we are providing some local file, so that our program will not disrupt abnormally. Okay, so our program will not terminated abnormally, because we want to make our program terminated normally. So that is why in order to sort out this issue, we are providing an alternative way to provide a local file. So we will write it down like this: if that particular program file is not there, then what you will do? Then go for local file, so that you will not get any exception. Okay, so that you will not terminate your program abnormally, right? So now till now you have an idea about what is an exception and why do we need exception handling in Java. This is very important right now. So what are the advantages of exception handling? And I'm 100% sure using this example, you will understand the concept of your exception and your exception handling in Java. So let's take one example. So in your coding part, what you generally do, you generally write statements, right? So I'm not mentioning here the statements. Let's assume you have in your program you have 6 statements. Now you have compiled these statements, and these statements are working perfectly. Okay, you are not getting any error. But during runtime, what will happen after once you have executed your statement one, it executed fine. Your statement 2, it executed fine. But during your statement 3, you got an exception. Then what will happen if you will get an exception? Whenever you will get an exception, remember your program will terminate automatically, and we generally call this kind of termination known as your abnormal termination. We call this termination as your abnormal termination. Abnormal termination means that because of this exception, we are not able to execute our statement number 4, statement number 5, statement number 6. So this is known as what we call it as our exception. So using exception, we are getting abnormal termination. So how do we resolve this issue? In order to resolve this issue, what we will do, we will form some sort of exception handling. We will find out some alternative way. Okay, we will find out some alternative way so that we will trigger this exception, so that what will happen, we will be able to execute all these statements and our program will your terminated normally. Okay, so we will get normal termination of the program. So this is all about our exception. So remember, after that statement, you will know once you will get exception now, your program will terminate it from that statement only. So again, I will give you some practical example, means some programs. Using those programs, you will understand why and what are the problems, and what kind of exceptions we might get, right? So the core advantage of exception is to maintain the normal flow of the program. See, we have handled this exception. Now we will be able to execute it. Like in our code zinger, now you will be able to basically execute your rest of the statement, like you can submit your code, whatever the next phases you have whenever you are suppose you are executing that particular scenario. So exception normally disrupt your normal flow of the application. That is why we use exception handling. And suppose there is statement 6, so same thing which I have already told you, I have posted in your statement, right? Just go through it after this lecture. Once I will upload these PPTs on your LMS, right? Now, this thing is very important. I think some of you already have an idea about that in Java. Like in the first lecture, we have covered that the memory represented or memory storage of our Java programming language, how JVM stores each and everything. So you know that we have heap memory, we have what stack memory and local memory, like that. Okay, so generally we focus it more on your heap memory as well as stack, like your objects always stored in our heap memory, but your static variables like your methods and all those things are basically stored in our stack. So first of all, we will understand what do you mean by runtime stack mechanism, and using this runtime stack mechanism, I will tell you that we might get some sort of error. we might get some sort of exception. Okay, so let's discuss it. First of all, what do you mean by runtime stack mechanism? So as you can see here in our program, we have a class named as main having public static void main. You already know, we already, and inside this method, what we are doing, we are calling our M1 method. And can we call our N1 method? Yes, we can call directly our M1 method. Why? Because our M1 method is our static method, right? Now, so this is how basically we can call this method. And now after that, what we are doing, we are calling our M2 method, right? And then we are basically executing our M2 method like that. Now, so how actually in our backend, how our JVM will basically perform the operation when we will get these such kind of static method. So remember always, whenever we have initially our stack is empty. So stack means always remember LIFO. LIFO means last in, first out. Okay, it means that last in first out. So you already have an idea about, suppose you are putting these plates. Okay, so the last plate, you already know that the plate which you put in this particular stack on the on in the last, you will pick it first. Okay, so this is an example of what last in. So we put this plate on in the last, but we are picking this plate in your first. Okay, so that is your last in, last whatever the plate we have put over there in that particular stack. And we are, if we want to pick that particular plate, so what we have to do, we have to first out that particular last in first out. Got the point? Like this. So similarly, last in first out concept we generally use in the case of what your stack. So how this thing is very important, let's check it out. So whenever you are going to execute this code, so first method you already know that it will execute which method, our main method. So whenever it will, our JVM will execute our main method. So initially in our stack, we will have what, our main method. Okay, so it will load which method, our main method. But inside this main method, we are calling this method M1 method. So automatically in our stack, what will happen? We will get our M1 method, right? Like this. Now again, our M1 method is calling M2 method. So automatically we will get our M2 method. So till now, till this statement, okay, how many methods are there in our stack? 3 methods are there. But remember, once we are going to execute this statement, okay, then and after this, what will happen? Once we are going to terminate this method, then automatically we will delete. We generally call it as what, pop. Pop is a keyword. We generally use it for that. Okay, we generally remove this method from that particular stack. So now how many? So now we have completed this statement. So once we have completed this statement, then what will happen? Then we will get this thing. Then what will happen? We will go back again to M1 and we will execute whatever the statement we have after this statement. So we don't have any statement. So that is why again we are going to terminate this method. So again we will remove it. Now our method contains only what? Our main method. So now at the end, so you can see, always remember your first method as well as your last method will always be what? Your main method. Remember, whenever you are executing your program in your stack, your first method as well as your last time, because we are following the concept of stack over here. Okay, and then once your entire program gets executed, so automatically it will terminate our main method also normally, and we will get the output. So we will get the output that is known as our Bennett University. So I hope that now you know the concept of runtime stack mechanism, how JVM basically perform the storage, or you can say that how stack are basically created by our JVM whenever we are having static methods in our Java programming language. Now let's check it out, an exception. that might occur. Okay, and then we are going to discuss about default exceptional handling. So right now here what will happen? See, for the same scenario, what we are doing, our method is calling what? Our main method M1. Then our M1 is calling what? Our M2 method, right? So till now, there, you already know that till this statement, what is happening? We are here. We are here, right? Now this. Now after this, what will happen? We have a statement like this, 10 divided by 0. And you already know that in integer, whenever we are getting a 10 divided by 0, so we are getting an arithmetic exception. Okay, and this kind of exception is known as your arithmetic exception. I think you have already faced this kind of your exception, right? So this kind of exception is known as your arithmetic exception. Now you got an exception over here. Got the point? So what will happen? So automatically what it will do, suppose we have some statements after that now, so it will not execute those statements and it will terminate this method. And first of all, what it will do, it will find out, do we have any exception handling for this code? So right now, apart from this code, is there anything I have written so far? No, I haven't written any handed your exception handling code, because here we got the exception and we are not handling the code. Then what will happen? It will terminate our this method. What will happen? Our JVM will terminate this method. Now again, our JVM will ask whether M1 method is having any Java exception handling code. So again, we don't have any Java exception handling code for this error, even in this method. So again, we will or terminate this method abnormally. Now again it will check here, do we have an exception over here, exception handling code over here? So again we don't have any exception and handling code in our main method. Then again it will terminate our main method abnormally. Then basically who is calling our exception this method, our main method? Our JVM. Now our JVM will say, okay, if none of these methods are having exception handling code, then what I will do, I will call one person, and that person is what you call it as our default exception handler. Okay, so it will call default exception handling in Java. So there is a default exception handler that is there in our Java programming language, which will automatically give us this error. And the error which we will get over there is, see, exception in thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception. See, we are getting this exception java.lang.arithmetic exception, and the exception which we are getting, the message which is telling us is our divided by 0. And where we are getting an exception, first of all we are getting an exception M2. So M2 is not resolving, that is why we are getting an exception M1 also, and that is why we are getting an exception main method also, right? So if somebody is going to ask you, if we got an exception, so who is basically handling that particular exception, and that we have, then you will give us the answer, give me the answer. The answer will be your default exception handler. But remember one thing, are we handling this code? No, we are not handling this code. Remember, even our default exception handler, somehow it is telling us the error. It is reflecting us, or it is giving us some sort of, you can say that output message, or you can say that output error message. But still, we are not able to execute our program normally. Here we are terminating our program abnormally, because see, after this statement, suppose we have one more statement, system.out.println, suppose hello world. Okay, So remember, it will not execute this statement. Why? Because here we are getting an exception over here. So that is the reason how we are going to resolve this issue. That is why we create our own exception handler. Remember, we always create our own exceptional handler. Right. So this is all about default exceptional handler in Java. The entire process I'm going to tell you. Okay. So if an exception is raised, okay. So let's talk it out with this example, and we will go through the entire process of our exceptional handler in our Java programming language. So we got an exception over here. Is 10 divided by 0 is what? We got an exception. Okay. Now, if an exception raised, the method in which it is raised is responsible for creating of exception object. So automatically our program will do what? It will create an exception object, right? It will create an exception object that in this statement I am getting an exception, and the exception is that related to 10 divided by 0, right? So this is the exception object which automatically, so all these things are going to be created by our JVM. Okay, now which includes the name. So objects contains what? Our name of the exception. So what is our name of the exception? Our arithmetic exception. What is the description of the exception? Our divide by 0. And where it is located, stack trace, it is in our main method, in our M2 method. Okay, so this is the exception object. Automatically it will create, once you got an exception, it will create an exception object containing three information, that is your name of the exception, your description of the exception, and your stack trace. After creating exception object, once this exception object gets created now, then the method hand over it to what? Your JVM. Then what it will do, it will say, okay JVM, I am now giving you this exception object. Now you handle this exception. Now you will find out whether do we have created any what we call it as your exception handling code, customized exception handling code or not. Just find it out. Right now, JVM will come and JVM will check for exception handling code. Do we have exception handling code, means customized, whether we have written by our own exception handling code. So we haven't written any exception handling code. So Java, what it will do, if the method does not contain any exception handling code, like here we don't have any exception handling code, then JVM terminates the method abnormally and removes the corresponding entry from the stack. So it will abnormally terminate this method and remove from this particular stack, right? Like this. Now after that, JVM identify the caller method. So who is the caller method? Our M1 is the caller method who is calling this M2 method where we got an exception. Got? So now it will check again whether this caller method contains exception handling code. So again, it does not contain exception handling code for our current scenario. Then what will happen if the caller does not contain any exception handling code? Then JVM terminates that method again abnormally and remove the corresponding entry from the stack. So again, it will remove. So here we are removing the entry for this program. We are removing the entry normally. Okay, normally. But for this code, we are removing this entry from the stack abnormally. Remember this thing, right? Now, after this, it will go and it will keeps on check for caller method, and it will at the end, it will check for this process will continue until your main method. So once we will reach the main method, because you already know that main is our first method, who is the caller of all other methods, right? Now if the main method does not contain exception handling code, then JVM terminates the main method also. Again, it will terminate this method abnormally. Again, abnormally. See the difference between normally and your abnormally. For this program, we are terminating everything normally. So that is why we are getting the correct output. But here we are not terminating our program normally. We are terminating our program abnormally. So that is why we are not getting the output. We are getting an error, exception error, right? Now, after this, just before terminating the program abnormally, because our main method does not contain exceptional handling code, then JVM terminates the main method and removes corresponding entry from the step. Now this step is very important. Remember, so in this step, what will happen? After this, JVM terminates the program abnormally. JVM handovers. So before terminating this program abnormally now, after this method, it will also terminate this program. So just before terminating this program, like before this, you can say that curly braces, so that you will understand what it will do. It will JVM hand over this object. So whatever the object we have created, the exception object over here, it will hand over this object to our default exception handler. Now this object is going to be handled by whom? Our default exceptional handler, okay, which is the component of JVM. So default exception handler just print exception information to the console in the following format, like in the name of the exception, description, and your stack trace. So this is how basically our JVM, our default exception handler, will basically show us our output in our console, that okay, this is the error you are getting. So suppose in future, if you got some sort of these such kind of exceptions, okay, always try to read whether you are getting exception or error. If you are getting an exception, you will find like this exception in thread main, and you will find out that this is the name of exception, this is the description of your exception, and this is where you are getting an exception. So what you will do, if I am getting some exception now, after executing this code, I will go through, okay, in main M2 I am getting this exception, right, in line number 12. So I will directly go through it and I will directly handle this particular exception, right? So this is all about your exception and your exception handler in Java. Right. So in the next lecture, what we are going to do, we are going to find out how we are going to, right now, we are going to discuss about in more depth about default exception handler in Java. I will show you some example. Then we will go for hierarchical, and then we will go for types of exceptions and all those things. Okay. So this topic is very interesting. Okay. But it is very important. So just go through it. If anyone is having any doubt, please feel free to ask. Yes, anyone is having any doubt? Yes, anyone?